Juan Pujol García was born on Valentine's Day, 1912, in Barcelona, Spain, which is poetic because nothing says romance quite like becoming one of history's greatest liars. His family background was a tug-of-war in miniature. His mother was a conservative Catholic who believed rules and tradition were the bedrock of society, while his father leaned socially liberal and more progressive in outlook. The result? Juan grew up allergic to authority in general. If someone told him to go left, he went right. And if told to sit still, he probably invented a reason to stand up out of spite. That defiance flared early. At 16, he walked out of school after a fight with a teacher and decided education was overrated. He was probably right. Who needs trigonometry when you can just as easily make enemies of world powers later in life? From there, he bounced between odd jobs, running a cinema for a while, dabbling in animal husbandry, and even farming. His work with chickens would one day give him more stability than politics or espionage ever could, but at this stage, he was more restless dreamer than farmer. Then came his first real brush with military life in 1931, when he served Spain's compulsory 6 months of service. They assigned him to the cavalry. This was not ideal. Pujol hated the military, and to make it worse, he hated horses. Picture being forced to babysit an animal the size of a refrigerator while also pretending to care about the glory of drilling in circles. Not exactly the romance he was born under. He served, he tolerated it, and he left with nothing but reinforced loathing for military life. Unfortunately, Spain was about to plunge into one of the ugliest conflicts of the 20th century, the Spanish Civil War. To grossly oversimplify a very complex event, it was fascists versus communists, nationalists versus Republicans, a choose-your-own-disaster civil conflict. And Garcia found himself unwillingly shoved right into the middle. In 1936, the Republic arrested his mother and sister as suspected counter-revolutionaries. A week later, they came for him. His crime? Not volunteering for their cause. He was tossed in jail because in revolutionary logic, refusing to fight was the same as treason. Luckily for Juan, chaos works in funny ways. Revolutionaries broke him out, slipped him a fake ID making him too old to be drafted, and turned him loose again. But his troubles weren't over. Returning home, he found his farm, the one thing he had left after leaving school, after prison, after constant upheaval, confiscated by the Republic for the war effort. It turns out nothing builds lifelong political opinions quite like someone stealing your chickens. From that point forward, Pujol despised socialism with the kind of venom usually reserved for sports rivals. So in a move that can only be described as extremely on brand, he enlisted with the Republican Army, not because he supported them, but just to defect. He trained as a telegraph lineman, stringing wires across battlefields, and at his first chance, he bolted across enemy lines to surrender to the Nationalists. That's right, the man later celebrated as the world's greatest double agent got his start as a liberal double-crosser. The Nationalists didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. They beat him, jailed him, and didn't believe a word about his supposed loyalty. He wasn't lying, exactly. He did want to fight the Republic, but his enthusiasm for fascism was zero. From that point on, he began to hate both sides with equal intensity. He loathed socialism for ruining his family, and he loathed nationalism for its cruelty and obsession with supremacy. In short, Garcia was becoming a man without a team, which is perfect training for being the kind of spy who will eventually troll an entire empire. When the smoke cleared and the Civil War ended in 1939, he had survived by sheer slipperiness, bouncing between both sides and never firing a shot. He left prison with a wife, a son, and the kind of ideological clarity only a nightmare can bring. Politics, in all forms, were a scam. He had seen neighbors kill each other over slogans, officers whip soldiers for disobedience, and families destroyed in the name of revolution. He emerged with one unshakable conclusion. Nobody deserved his loyalty, especially those demanding it most loudly. By 1940, the world was on fire. Germany had steamrolled much of Europe, Britain stood bloodied but unbowed, and the United States was still pretending it could sit this one out. Juan Pujol Garcia, farmer, cavalry dropout, part-time jailbird, looked at the mess and felt one overriding emotion: disgust. Fascists, socialists, nationalists, communists, monarchists, every flavor of politics he'd sampled had left him bitter. And here came Hitler, rolling the worst elements of them all into one franchise of evil. Most people in neutral Spain gritted their teeth and tried to stay out of it. Pujol, however, decided he wanted in. Not as a soldier, he'd learned that mistake already, but as something far more mischievous. He wanted to be a spy for Britain. Now, on paper, this is ridiculous. Picture walking into the British Embassy in Madrid in the middle of the bloodiest war the world has ever seen, asking politely if you could please be given top secret assignments against the Nazis, no questions asked. Britain was not impressed. They turned him down once, twice, 3 times. Each rejection reinforced the bureaucratic logic that a random Spaniard with no credentials, no training, and no experience probably wasn't the best candidate to hand classified information to. Most people would have walked away. Pujol was not most people. If Britain didn't want him, then fine. He would go straight to their enemy. Not to help them, oh no. He wasn't switching sides out of loyalty. He was doing it to troll them into oblivion, to out-petty the Reich, to weaponize nonsense until Germany choked on it. So he strolled up to the Germans with a bold pitch. He was a pro-Nazi Spanish politician, friendly to their cause, and on his way to London for a diplomatic mission. No one asked why he, a relatively unknown man in neutral Spain, had the sudden stroke of opportunity. He backed it up with a little forgery magic, a fake diplomatic passport procured in Lisbon, waved in front of German intelligence like a golden ticket. To his eternal delight, they bought it. Germany sent an actual spy to test him. The agent quizzed him, vetted his story, and, astonishingly, gave him the thumbs up. Soon Pujol had a codebook, a vial of invisible ink, and 600 pounds sterling for expenses. In modern terms, this was a Nazi starter pack for espionage. His mission? Go to London, recruit a network of agents, and feed Berlin priceless intelligence. His actual plan? Stay in neutral territory, read British newspapers, and make stuff up. And thus began one of the most spectacularly absurd spy careers in history. Pujol never set foot in Britain during this first phase. Instead, he camped out in Lisbon, bought stacks of newspapers, and studied books about British society. From the comfort of his rented rooms, he wrote reports so convincing the Germans believed he was wandering the streets of London in a trench coat. When he read in a paper that there was a fair in Glasgow, he dutifully reported it as if he'd attended. When he learned from a travel guide how crowds moved in Piccadilly Circus, he relayed that insight as fieldwork. He even pulled details from real estate listings to describe the costs of housing. The only snag was money. Britain's pre-decimal currency system was baffling to him. All pounds and shillings and florins stacked like a math problem gone wrong. So in his expense reports, he just wrote vague things like, dinner at restaurant, approximately £6, we'll reconcile later. Instead of being suspicious, the Germans praised him for not caring about reimbursement and focusing on the mission. Only in Nazi accounting could incompetence look like dedication. Then came the piece de resistance, the Phantom Network. Pujol began vetting agents out of thin air. A Mr. John Doe here, a helpful shipping clerk there, a sympathetic typist in the ministry, each one described with enough mundane detail to seem real. Soon, German intelligence was filing elaborate dossiers on a spy ring that existed only in Pujol's imagination. It got so elaborate that even the British noticed. MI5 picked up some of the transmissions and launched a manhunt through London, convinced there was a dangerous Nazi agent building a network right under their noses. In reality, it was just Pujol, alone in Spain, trolling both sides at once. By now, Juan Pujol García had convinced Germany he was a loyal spy embedded in London. The problem, of course, was that he wasn't in London. He wasn't even in Britain. He was in Lisbon, drinking coffee and cutting clippings out of newspapers. To maintain the illusion, he needed more than reports about fairs in Glasgow and vague notes about train timetables. He needed a network. So he built one, out of nothing. Pujol began inventing agents, each with their own quirks, jobs, and backstories. He conjured up shipping clerks, military typists, dock workers, and even a couple of aristocrats sympathetic to the Nazi cause. He didn't just give them names, he gave them personalities. One agent might be dedicated but forgetful, another reliable but prone to illness. These weren't spies, they were characters in the world's deadliest improv skit. And Germany ate it up. Each new character was dutifully cataloged by German intelligence, their fictional lives treated as hard fact. Berlin filed reports on what Mr. John Doe was seeing on the docks or what Mrs. Smith overheard at a ministry office. Every time Pujol needed to cover a mistake or explain a contradiction, he pinned it on one of his imaginary subagents. Oh, that report was late? Blame Jones. He's a scatterbrain. The Germans nodded, noted it down, and praised Pujol for his honesty. Before long, his fictional spy ring was so extensive that even the British got spooked. MI5 intercepted some of the German communications and became convinced a serious Nazi network was operating in London. They launched a manhunt through the capital, searching for a ring of infiltrators that didn't exist. Imagine the irony. British was burning resources to catch Germany's top spy in London, who was actually in Portugal making things up. And still, the charade grew. At one point, German handlers wondered why one of his agents in Liverpool hadn't reported on a major fleet departure. Simple. Pujol claimed the man was bedridden. Weeks later, he died. Problem solved. But Pujol didn't stop there. To sell the illusion, he convinced the British to print an obituary in a local paper for the fake agent. He then mailed a clipping to his German handlers as proof. Germany mourned the loss of a local spy. They even sent condolences and a generous pension to his supposed widow. Yes, Germany paid a death benefit to a woman who didn't exist. This was not a one-off gag. Pujol cycled his phantom agents through careers, crises, and occasional demises as needed. One was relocated for safety. Another became inactive due to ill health. A few simply vanished, and every shift in his imaginary workforce gave him more excuses, more wiggle room, more credibility. It was like running a soap opera, with Berlin as the only audience. The genius wasn't just the lies, but the pacing. Pujol knew not to give Germany too much too fast. He kept the reports plausible, troop movements slightly off, rumors instead of hard facts, chatter overheard in pubs. Enough accuracy to earn trust, enough ambiguity to avoid exposure, and always reinforced by the testimony of agents who only existed in his typewriter. What's staggering is how much trust Germany put into this mirage. By the early 1940s, they considered Pujol's network one of their crown jewels in Britain. So much so that they discouraged further recruitment on the island. Why bother when Garbo had it covered? That was his nickname the British would later give him, Garbo, after actress Greta Garbo, for his ability to play roles with absolute conviction. But at this stage, he wasn't Garbo yet. He was still Juan Garcia, sitting in Portugal, keeping two empires chasing ghosts. By 1942, Juan Pujol García had been pretending to spy for Germany for over a year without ever leaving Iberia. He had written letters, invented agents, and orchestrated the most elaborate catfishing scheme of the century. But he was still a freelancer, unrecognized, unofficial, and one bureaucratic rejection away from fading into obscurity. Then America entered the war. When U.S. personnel set up shop in Lisbon, Pujol saw another chance. He walked into their office and, with his usual deadpan audacity, announced, "I've been working as a spy for the Germans. Here's my file." And he laid out proof, transmissions, contacts, the dossiers of his imaginary agents, and the trust he'd earned from Berlin. The Americans didn't know what to make of it. On one hand, he was a Spaniard with no formal background. On the other, he was single-handedly trolling the Nazis into wasting time and money. They passed him to the British with a clear message. This guy is too good to ignore. Finally, Britain relented. They brought him to London, the city he'd been pretending to inhabit for over a year. Imagine arriving for the first time in a place you've already described in meticulous detail to your enemies. It was like walking onto a movie set of his own lies. Once in London, MI6 recruited him formally, gave him a desk, and christened him with the codename Garbo after Greta Garbo, the actress famed for her dramatic performances. It was perfect. Juan Garcia had been playing the role of a lifetime, and now he had a stage big enough for his act. The work only intensified. Under MI6 supervision, Garbo continued feeding reports to Berlin, but now with precision. He sent Germany a staggering volume of letters and radio messages, all carefully crafted. In total, more than 300 written reports passed from his hands to theirs. His network expanded to 27 sub-agents, each with their own quirks and jobs. Some of them were so detailed that Garbo had to keep notes just to remember who was who. What made him brilliant wasn't the invention, but balance. He knew how to keep credibility alive. If you lie all the time, people stop trusting you. So Garbo gave the Germans plenty of harmless truths, train schedules, shipping manifests, troop details that were already public. When they cross-checked him, he was accurate. That earned him the right to bend reality when it mattered most. And when he did lie, he did so artfully. He always had a fall guy. If he misreported a convoy location, it wasn't Garbo's fault. It was the careless dock worker in Liverpool or the inexperienced courier in Glasgow. If one agent got too sloppy, Garbo killed them off, complete with obituary clippings. His phantom subordinates were not just cover stories, they were scapegoats, excuses, and safety nets rolled into one. The Germans responded with admiration. They trusted Garbo so much they slowed down recruitment elsewhere, figuring he had Britain covered. To protect their golden asset, they even shipped him specialized equipment, code books, encryption tools, and eventually a full radio set. Berlin believed these deliveries were being smuggled into London in utmost secrecy. In reality, they arrived directly at MI6 headquarters, where British cryptographers unpacked them like Christmas presents. By late 1942, Garbo had been fully absorbed into MI6, and his creativity was being channeled into real operations. He wasn't just freelancing anymore. He was an integral cog in the Allied deception machine. His first big test came with Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. The stakes were enormous. Torch was the Allies' debut on the European continent, a chance to push Axis forces out of Africa and secure the Mediterranean. Surprise mattered. If the Germans caught wind of the invasion too soon, they could reinforce and make life hell for the Americans and British troops trying to land. Garbo's assignment was delicate. Keep Berlin confident in his loyalty while making sure they never got actionable intelligence in time. And he pulled it off with a flourish. In the days before Torch, Garbo wrote to his German handlers that he had seen a fleet of British warships leaving port. He even described them in Mediterranean camouflage, an impressively accurate detail that made his story shine. He dated the letter before the invasion began, as if he were right there on the docks watching it unfold. Then he waited. The British intentionally delayed the delivery until after the landings. By the time Germany received it, the invasion was already underway. Berlin read the report, realized how perfectly it described the events they were now witnessing, and lamented only that it had arrived too late to act. Their response? Praise. Glowing, unreserved praise. Instead of questioning why one of their top agents hadn't found a faster way to deliver such urgent information, they congratulated him on his magnificent work. It was like congratulating the fire alarm for going off after the building had already burned down. This became Garbo's formula, a careful mix of precise truth, strategic lies, and convenient delays. He gave Germany just enough accurate detail to make him indispensable, but always too late to change the outcome. And when something went wrong, he blamed one of his phantom agents. One example, a German commander pointed out that an agent supposedly based in Liverpool hadn't reported on a fleet departure. Garbo coolly explained that the man was bedridden with illness. When pressed, he extended the excuse. The poor fellow was gravely ill, then deceased. To drive the nail in, Garbo arranged for the British to print a fake obituary in a Liverpool newspaper. He mailed it to Berlin, who mourned the loyal agent they had never met. They even sent a pension to his widow, money that of course found its way back into Garbo's hands. The brilliance was in the layers. His network of imaginary agents wasn't just busy work, it was a protective shield. If intelligence proved faulty, The blame shifted to a fall guy. If Berlin demanded more detail, Garbo could consult with one of his subordinates, and if anyone questioned the logistics, he had a ready-made cover story about delays, illnesses, or even deaths. Germany rewarded him handsomely. They were so convinced of his value that they decided he was too important to rely on letters alone. They sent him a state-of-the-art radio transmitter and an Enigma code machine with the latest cipher keys. To Berlin, this was a tightly controlled secret operation. To Britain, it was a windfall. Garbo simply unpacked the equipment at MI6 headquarters, where the British cryptographers gratefully copied the codes and used them to read German traffic. Imagine the scene: German intelligence congratulating themselves on securing their London mole, while British officers were literally walking across the hall to borrow the enemy's newest code books from Garbo's desk. It was espionage reduced to slapstick, except the stakes were as high as they could be. By 1944, the war had reached a knife's edge. The Allies were ready to launch an invasion of occupied Europe, the kind of operation that could either crack Hitler's empire wide open or end in catastrophe. This was Operation Overlord, better known by the name of its opening act, D-Day. The Germans knew an invasion was coming. What they didn't know was where. Logic pointed to the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. It was closer, more practical, and strategically obvious, which is why the Allies chose Normandy instead. But convincing Hitler and his generals to keep their armies fixated on Calais required more than logic. It required artifice. It required misdirection. It required Garbo. Months before the invasion, Operation Fortitude was set in motion. A deception campaign designed to convince Germany that Normandy was just a feint and that the real blow would fall at Calais. Garbo became one of its stars. Between January and June 1944, he sent over 500 radio messages to his German handlers, sometimes 20 in a single day. Each one dripped with carefully measured detail: troop rumors, logistical chatter, even fake frustrations with his imaginary subagents. He passed along just enough truth to stay credible while seeding the falsehoods that would keep Hitler staring at the wrong beach. He told Berlin that American forces were massing in southern England. True, but not for Calais. He hinted at an invasion along the northern French coast. Plausible, but misleading. Every report was another brushstroke on a canvas designed to portray Normandy as a sideshow. The beauty of Garbo's lies was how ordinary they sounded. Real intelligence rarely looks cinematic. It comes wrapped in small observations, half-hearted rumors, and tedious logistical notes. Garbo mastered that tone. His reports sounded boring enough to be real, which made them lethal. Then came the night of June 5, 1944. The invasion was hours away. Paratroopers were boarding planes, landing craft were being loaded. The entire fate of the war hung in the balance. And Garbo was about to play his most dangerous hand. He sent a message to Berlin around 3 a.m. His story? One of his sub-agents had finally uncovered the plan. The invasion would hit Normandy at dawn. He gave them the time, 6:30 a.m., and the place, Omaha Beach. It was the kind of golden intelligence spies dream of delivering. But there was a problem. Germany didn't answer. Whether the operators were asleep, overwhelmed, or simply inattentive, no one picked up his call. By the time Berlin responded, around 8 a.m., the invasion was already underway. Allied troops were storming the beaches. The most precise, accurate report Garbo ever sent arrived too late to matter. And somehow, this only made him more convincing. When the Germans finally came back on the line, Garbo exploded. He scolded them, berated them, and told them their negligence had cost lives. "I cannot accept excuses or negligence," he thundered. "Were it not for my ideas, I would abandon this work." The fury in his words sold the performance. Far from doubting him, Berlin concluded that they had a dedicated agent whose warnings they had tragically squandered. His credibility soared. In the days after the landings, Garbo doubled down. The Allies needed more time to secure their fragile beachhead in Normandy. If the Germans rushed reinforcements from Calais, the invasion could collapse. So Garbo sold them a bigger lie. The invasion at Normandy wasn't the real invasion. The real storm was yet to come. He reported that General George S. Patton, the Americans' most aggressive and celebrated commander, was massing a huge army in southeast England. According to Garbo, Patton commanded 150,000 men, thousands of tanks, and hundreds of aircraft, all poised to strike across the Channel at Calais. The Germans swallowed it whole. Hitler himself believed Patton's 1st U.S. Army Group was the Allies' main striking force. The evidence seemed overwhelming because the Allies had manufactured it. Inflatable tanks lined the fields, wooden aircraft were parked on runways, radios chattered with scripted nonsense. It was the greatest stage trick in military history, and Garbo's reports were the narration. Every day he updated Berlin. Patton was still waiting for the order, supplies were still building, the blow was imminent. Any day now, Calais would erupt. Erwin Rommel, Germany's best general in the West, smelled something off. He suspected Normandy was the real deal. But Hitler and the high command clung to Garbo's word like gospel. For weeks they kept armored divisions and reserve bottled up near Calais, waiting for an invasion that never came. The effect was staggering. 2 months after D-Day, more German soldiers were still sitting idle near Calais than had fought at Normandy itself. Hitler's obsession with Garbo's intelligence crippled Germany's ability to respond. By the time they realized the truth, the Allies had poured men and material into France, built a foothold, and begun the liberation of Europe. In July 1944, Garbo received news that defies belief. Adolf Hitler himself had awarded him the Iron Cross, one of the highest honors in the German military, for his outstanding service. The recommendation came directly from High Command, who credited him with providing vital intelligence about Patton's Phantom Army. Meanwhile, Britain was equally impressed. Garbo was awarded the Order of the British Empire, one of the highest distinctions available. To this day, he is believed to be the only person ever decorated by both Nazi Germany and the United Kingdom for the same work, the world's most decorated liar. Historians still argue about the tipping point of World War II, but many agree that without the deception at Calais, D-Day might have failed. If German reinforcements had rushed to Normandy in force, the Allies could have been thrown back into the sea. Garbo's lies, coupled with inflatable tanks and stagecraft worthy of a magician, bought the time needed to turn Normandy into a bridgehead. It's no exaggeration to say that the fate of Europe rested on the credibility of a man who once faked his way through a cavalry unit because he hated horses. By late 1944, the war was turning decisively against Germany. The Normandy landings had succeeded, Paris had been liberated, and the Reich was bleeding on every front. But Hitler still had a few cards to play. Among them, his vengeance weapons, the V-1 flying bombs. Crude, pulse-jet-powered rockets, the V-1s were launched at London in waves, meant to terrorize civilians and prove Germany could still strike back. Garbo, as always, found himself in the middle. Berlin wanted him to report on the effectiveness of their rocket attacks. Were the bombs hitting their targets? Was London in flames? And more disturbingly, they wanted him to suggest new aiming points, places of maximum effect. It was an impossible assignment. If Garbo told the truth, that the rockets were killing civilians and smashing neighborhoods, he'd be helping refine the Nazi terror campaign. But if he lied and claimed they were ineffective, Berlin could always send a plane overhead and confirm otherwise. And as for giving them new targets, he couldn't exactly say, "Don't bomb schools, try the soccer stadium instead." So, with MI6's help, Garbo faked his way out. The story was that British authorities had grown suspicious of him. His supposed pro-Nazi ties had been discovered, and he'd been briefly arrested as a suspected spy. To smooth things over, the British government had supposedly issued him a written apology after his release. Garbo sent this fabricated apology to Berlin as proof, complete with official-looking letterhead. The Germans bought it. They concluded that Garbo's access to London had been compromised and that he could no longer provide first-hand reports on the rockets. Problem solved. For the rest of the war, he operated in Britain as a fugitive, occasionally sending messages from the shadows, while in reality he never left MI6's offices. Berlin never suspected a thing. By the time the Reich collapsed in 1945, Garbo had earned an almost mythical reputation inside German intelligence. He'd been entrusted with the highest level Enigma codes, showered with funding for his 27 imaginary agents, and hailed as one of the Abwehr's most valuable men. Hitler himself had signed off on his Iron Cross. Britain was no less impressed. For his work in Operation Fortitude and his role in safeguarding the Normandy landings, he was awarded the Order of the British Empire. The world's most successful double agent ended the war with medals from both sides, the Iron Cross from the Nazis and the OBE from the Allies. It's hard to think of a sharper irony. In an era where loyalty was absolute and betrayal was punishable by death, Juan Pujol García was honored as both a German hero and a British one. He had never fired a weapon, stolen a document, or planted a bomb. His entire arsenal consisted of letters, rumors, and lies, and yet those lies shaped the fate of Europe. After the war, Juan Pujol García decided that he had tempted fate enough. He had duped the Nazis at the highest level, earned medals from both Hitler and King George VI, and played one of the greatest cons in history. But victory came at a risk. What if a bitter former Nazi officer tracked him down? What if someone decided the man who humiliated the Reich deserved revenge? So he disappeared. In 1949, Pujol faked his own death. According to official records, he had succumbed to malaria in Angola. In reality, he slipped quietly across the Atlantic to Venezuela. There he reinvented himself as a bookstore owner and later ran a small gift shop. It was an astonishing transition, from manipulating armies and deceiving Hitler to selling novels and postcards. For decades, no one knew. To the world, Garbo was dead. To his neighbors in Caracas, he was just another shopkeeper with a Spanish accent and a quiet demeanor. The truth only resurfaced in the 1970s when a curious British historian tracked him down. After a painstaking search, which included cold calling every J. Garcia in Barcelona's phone book, the trail led to his nephew and finally to Juan himself. The legend of Garbo was reborn. In 1984, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, Pujol returned to Europe. He met Prince Philip, paid respects at Normandy cemeteries, and even had a private audience with Queen Elizabeth II. For a man who had once been rejected 3 times by the British Embassy, the reversal was poetic. He spent his final years in relative peace back in Venezuela, surrounded by his family. He died in 1988 of natural causes, this time for real. History nearly forgot him, but those who remembered know the scale of his achievement. With nothing but imagination, persistence, and spite, Garbo became the man who fooled Hitler. He won no battles in the traditional sense, but his lies shifted divisions, delayed reinforcements, and bought the Allies the time they needed to turn the tide of the war. In the end, Garbo's story is proof that not all wars are won with bullets and bombs. Sometimes, one stubborn man with a gift for storytelling can move armies. And sometimes, truth really is stranger and funnier than fiction. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And until next time, stand tall.